Before we begin, if you believe love can grow in the quietest places and forgiveness can change everything, like this video and subscribe to the channel. This story may not begin with roses, but it just might stay with you forever. There were no flowers on my wedding day, no roses, no lilies, not even a sprig of baby's breath tucked behind a ribbon. I stood alone in a room that smelled of varnish and history, wearing a dress that had once belonged to my mother. Lace yellowed gently at the edges. A pearl button had come loose at the sleeve. It was too delicate to be altered, so I left it as it was. Like everything else in this marriage, it didn't quite fit, but I had to step into it anyway. The Hawthorne estate was as cold as I remembered from the first time I was brought. Here, polished stone floors that echoed when you walked, ceilings too high to hold warmth, and windows that watched but didn't welcome. And yet, the lighting was soft, deliberately so. Like even the chandeliers knew how harsh this truth looked in daylight. I was marrying a man I barely knew, and less than that, I was saving a mother who meant everything. A quiet knock on the door, then Margaret, the housekeeper, peeked in. "They're ready downstairs," she said, not meeting my eyes. Her voice held the tone of someone who'd seen many things and judged few. I nodded. I didn't ask who they were. I already knew. The officiant, the lawyer, Julian. Julian. Hawthorne. He was 38, sharp-featured, brilliant in the way that scared people. The kind of man whose silence filled a room faster than his words ever could. We had met only twice. Once when he came to sign the agreement with my father, and once at my mother's bedside when she had fallen unconscious for the second time. He had stayed 10 minutes, said nothing, paid everything. I never forgot the way he looked at me in that hospital room. Not unkind, but not human either, like someone who was always calculating. I walked down the stairs alone. No music played. No one stood waiting. There was no aisle, just the length of a Persian runner that led from the curved staircase to the front of a marble fireplace. There, Julian stood, in a black suit that looked like it had never known a wrinkle. One hand in his pocket, the other, holding nothing at all. His eyes met mine, and I felt nothing. Not butterflies, not dread, just a hollow kind of knowing. He didn't smile. I didn't expect him to. We signed the papers. He nodded once to the officiant. "That's all," he said, and just like that I became Mrs. Clara Hawthorne. No kiss, no vows, no applause. Just a soft, "you may go now," and the closing of a thick, leather-bound book. Later, in the guest room, my new room, I opened a drawer in the old writing desk, looking for a hair clip. My curls had begun to fall loose, and I wanted something, anything, to make me feel put together. Instead, my fingers caught the edge of something soft. Paper. It was thin, yellowing, folded 3 times. I don't know why I opened it. Perhaps because I was already unraveling, and I needed something to hold on to. Or maybe because it felt warmer than the air around me. The letter was handwritten in faded ink. No date, no salutation. Only a few sentences. "You once told me silence could be its own kind of cruelty. I've spent my whole life proving you right. I still see you in the way wind bends trees." And in the voice of the daughter I'll never meet, it was signed. J.H., my throat closed. J.H., not Julian Hawthorne. Not necessarily, but it was his home, his family. And somehow my mother's old wedding dress, the one I wore today, was kept in this house's cedar closet, not our own. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket, close to my leg, where it might burn less. Back in the sitting room, Julian stood by the window, talking to no one, staring into the dusk. He turned only slightly as I passed him on the way to the guest wing. "You'll find everything you need has been arranged," he said. His voice was calm, without warmth or distance. Just function. "Thank you," I replied. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't want to say more. His eyes lingered on me for one breath longer than they should have. Not like a man assessing a wife, like someone watching a storm and wondering if it would pass or stay. Then he turned away. In bed, that night, I stared up at the ceiling painted in pale vines and leaves, too delicate to feel real. Somewhere in the pipes, hot water ran. Somewhere below, a clock ticked like a soft metronome, reminding me of every second I wasn't home. I thought of my mother. I thought of her voice, singing softly in our old kitchen, stirring tea with one hand while pressing a warm cloth to my forehead with the other. I had not heard her sing in months. Pain had taken the melody away. And yet tonight, in this grand house where no one loved me, I could almost hear her again. I reached for the letter in my pocket, ran my fingers over the faded ink. Then I whispered to no one, "If this is how it begins, God help me learn how to stay. The walls here don't echo, they absorb." My footsteps vanish the moment they touch the floor, like the house itself is swallowing sound, unsure if it wants me heard or forgotten. It had been 20 hours since the wedding. I hadn't seen Julian again. The housekeeper brought up breakfast, on a silver tray, too polished, too perfect. I didn't touch it. The eggs were warm, but lifeless. Like everything else here, prepared with money, not care. I wandered the estate that afternoon, careful not to look like I was exploring. The hallways seemed endless, lined with art that didn't match and windows that looked out onto gray skies and trimmed hedges. Even the light seemed muted, like it had been filtered before being allowed in. I passed a piano room, untouched. A conservatory where nothing grew. A library that smelled like smoke and leather, but not like home. I missed the scent of detergent on the old cushions in our Vermont kitchen. Missed the creak in the floorboard by the stove where Mom always stood when stirring soup. Missed the way her humming made the walls feel softer. That evening, I walked into the kitchen myself. The main chef had gone home. The staff knew better than to interrupt what wasn't scheduled. I found an old kettle, wiped the dust off, and let my hands move the way they used to at home, without needing to ask permission. Chamomile. That's what Mom always brewed on nights when she couldn't sleep, or when I had questions she wasn't ready to answer. It never gave us solutions. Just silence that felt less sharp. I sat by the window while the water began to hiss. The scent rose slowly, patient, like comfort returning on tired feet. And then, unexpectedly, a voice. "You boil your own tea." I turned. Julian stood at the edge of the kitchen, one hand on the doorframe, the other holding a leather-bound notebook at his side. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up. He looked more tired than I remembered from the wedding. Or maybe less guarded. I didn't know I needed permission. I replied, more gently than I intended. "You don't," he said. "I just haven't seen anyone use that kettle since I was a boy." He walked in, not toward me, but toward the far cupboard, opened it, paused, then closed it again like he'd forgotten what he wanted. "I'll be out of town tomorrow," he said, still not looking at me. "Meetings in Chicago." I nodded. "Your life doesn't have to change because I'm here." He glanced at me now. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Then he said, almost too quietly, "It already has." When he left the room, I remained seated for a long time, the teacup warm in my hands. The words didn't land right away. Not as affection, but not as indifference either. Just truth. Later that night, I called the hospital. "Still stable," the nurse said. She had some discomfort earlier, but we adjusted her medication. "Did she talk?" "A little. She mentioned tea, asked for you." My throat closed. I promised to visit next week, once things settled, as if anything would settle in a marriage, built on obligation and signed lines. Before bed, I searched for something to read, and ended up returning to the desk, the one where I found the letter yesterday. Its drawers were mostly empty, save for a stack of blank paper and a silver pen with the Hawthorne crest. The letter was still hidden under my pillow. I didn't read it again. I just held it, like a thread I couldn't yet follow, but couldn't afford to drop. The next morning, Margaret brought a new tray for breakfast. Again, untouched. But something was different. Tucked next to the linen napkin was a simple note. Handwritten, not in my father's script, not from the staff. Just 4 words. Chamomile, from the garden. I blinked, then lifted the cup. The scent was familiar, but richer, deeper. Fresher than any I'd brewed before, and it hit me all at once. Julian had a garden, and he had sent this. I didn't sleep well after the tea. It wasn't discomfort. It was anticipation of something I couldn't name, like the soft hum that comes before a storm, or the way you sense someone is standing behind you before they speak. The note from Julian had been brief, but it lingered louder than anything he'd said aloud. Chamomile. From the garden. His garden. A space I hadn't been invited to. A piece of him he hadn't shown. By mid-morning, he had already left for Chicago. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I needed something to tether me, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself returning to the old desk, the one with the drawer that creaked like it had been waiting to be opened. I took out the letter again. The ink was faded, but the emotions behind it hadn't dulled. You once told me silence could be its own kind of cruelty. I still see you in the way wind bends trees. It haunted me. What if it wasn't a stranger's letter? What if it wasn't written to someone else? I traced the initials again. J.H., and something sharp and wild rose in my chest. Julian's full name was Julian Jonathan Hawthorne. I'd seen it once on a document. My mother's name was Elise Monroe, and she had never spoken of anyone named Hawthorne. Not once. Not ever. But the way her voice softened when she talked about her time in Boston. The way her eyes went somewhere else when she looked out the window at dusk. It was the same silence I now saw in Julian. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking, but I also couldn't unsee it. So I did something I hadn't done since I moved in. I went to the Hawthorne Library. It wasn't like libraries in movies. No grand spiral staircase, no cozy corners with wool rugs and candles, just cold marble, leather-bound volumes, and a heavy table in the center that smelled faintly of old whiskey and cedar. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw a frame on the wall, a portrait of a man in uniform, standing with his hand on a young boy's shoulder. The man had sharp cheekbones, a proud mouth, and Julian's eyes. Underneath it, the inscription read, Jonathan Hawthorne, 1952-2001, founder, patriot, father. I stepped closer. There, on the lower shelf beneath the frame, were 3 journals, worn, unlabeled. I opened the middle one. Most of it was finance, stock predictions, company expansion notes, but tucked between 2 pages about overseas acquisitions, I found something unexpected. April 1979. Elise's hair smells like orange blossoms. She folds letters even when they're blank. I told her I'd write, but I didn't. I'm writing now, though she'll never read it. My father would never allow it. He said she would stain the bloodline. She was never the stain. I was. I sat down. Hard. Elise. My mother. I read the rest standing by the fire. 3 entries later, he wrote, I heard she moved away. Vermont, they said. Married someone safe. I hope he treats her like gold. I couldn't. And then, if she ever has a daughter, I hope she never meets a man like me. But if she does, I pray he's better. I couldn't breathe. The man who wrote that letter, Jonathan Hawthorne, Julian's father, had loved my mother, truly, but never chosen her. And now, decades later, I had married his son, not by love, by contract. And yet somehow, the universe had looped us all back together. I ran my fingers along the binding of the journal, trembling. I didn't feel angry. I felt small, like my life had been shaped by shadows I never even knew existed. When Julian returned that evening, I was waiting for him in the study, letter in hand. He paused in the doorway. "You found it." "I wasn't looking," I said. But I did. He walked slowly toward the fireplace, then stood beside it, hands in his pockets. "I suppose you have questions." "I suppose you have answers." He nodded. "Some." I swallowed hard. "Did your father love her?" "Yes." "And you?" "Why me?" His eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Because when he was dying, he made me promise something, said if there's ever a chance to honor her, to protect her family, take it. At first I thought marrying you was duty, a clean debt to pay. But now, his voice tightened. Now, I wonder if he was trying to give me something neither of us knew I needed. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore. It was full of things we couldn't say yet, full of pain we didn't cause, but had inherited. I looked down at the letter again, folded it once, then twice, then held it out to him. "I think she meant for it to be found." He took it gently, with 2 hands, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face, not power, not pride, but loss. That night I didn't cry. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt the weight of lives that had come before me, pressing gently on my shoulders, not to crush me, but to show me the path forward. It rained the morning we brought my mother home. Not a storm, not even a real downpour. Just a steady hush, like the sky had run out of things to say but couldn't bear to be silent. She had grown too frail for the hospital. The doctors called it comfort care, though nothing about it felt comfortable. The oxygen machine hummed gently in the corner of our family home in Vermont. Her breaths came slowly now, deeper than sleep, but not as certain. Julian drove the car. He didn't ask if he should. He didn't wait for my father, who still hadn't returned. He simply appeared that morning in the foyer, coat already damp, from the mist, keys in hand. "We'll take her home properly," he said. "It's where she deserves to be." The drive was long. I sat in the back seat beside my mother, her hand curled inside mine like a forgotten petal. Julian didn't speak once, but he adjusted the heat twice, turned off the music when a loud ad came on, slowed at every bump in the road, as if her bones were glass. When we arrived, he helped lift her into the house. His suit jacket was soaked. He didn't notice, or didn't care. I did. That afternoon, while the nurse prepared the bed, I moved through the kitchen searching for ginger and honey, things that had always comforted her. Julian was already there. No tie, sleeves rolled, knees slightly bent, rummaging through the cabinet under the sink like he belonged here. "I used to make tea," he said, not looking up. "When my father was sick, ginger, honey. He said it helped with the burning in his throat." He found the old kettle and stood, brushing a cobweb from the lid. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. We worked in quiet rhythm. He chopped ginger. I poured water. He stirred slowly. I found the chipped mug my mother always used in winter, the one with the robin painted on the side. When he handed me the tea, his fingers brushed mine. They were warm, steady. Later that evening, I found him sitting at the foot of my mother's bed. He wasn't speaking, just watching her sleep, one hand resting gently on her wrist as if to remind her she wasn't alone. "She always liked the sound of the rain," I said softly. He nodded, then whispered, "I wish I'd met her before." He didn't explain what before meant. He didn't have to. Before the money, before the silence, before the promises he didn't know how to keep. I walked him to the porch later, umbrella in hand. The rain was still falling, softer now, like a lullaby. "I didn't expect you to come," I said. "You had meetings today, important ones." "I canceled them." "Why?" He paused, then looked at me, not as a man used to being obeyed, but as someone unsure if he had the right to answer. Because this mattered more. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't grand, but it was real. In that moment, he didn't look like a CEO or a Hawthorne. He looked like someone who had stopped running, someone who had decided to stay. When he left, I didn't return to the bedroom right away. I stood in the kitchen, holding the warm kettle, watching the last trail of steam fade into the window pane. It wasn't just ginger and water. It was care. Memory. A man's hands learning how to soften. Before bed, I checked my mother's drawer. She had always kept old things. Sewing needles, dried lavender, letters from years long past. Among them, folded in a napkin, was a torn photograph. One side showed my mother younger, laughing. The other side, cut cleanly, showed the shoulder of a man in uniform, the corner of a gold ring, and the edge of a name. I turned it over, a single note in my mother's handwriting. Sometimes love isn't about who stays. It's about who returns, even when they don't have to. That night, I sat by her bed and sang softly, the way she once did when I was small. I didn't know all the words, but the melody stayed. Somewhere upstairs, I imagined Julian sitting in the guest room, holding his father's journal, wondering if he'd done enough. He had. And for the first time since I arrived in this house, I didn't feel like a transaction. I felt seen, not as a bride, but as a daughter worth honoring. The table was older than I was. Solid oak, square-edged, with deep scratches from years of plates, elbows, and hot pans carelessly placed without coasters. My mother always said that a table should be lived on, not just looked at. I had learned to read at that table. Dad used to drink his coffee there at 5 a.m., in silence. And when Mom got sick, it became the place where we sorted through prescriptions and insurance papers, pretending this was just another dinner to prepare. Now, it held 2 plates, 2 forks, and a folded linen napkin I hadn't seen since last Thanksgiving. Julian stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, knife in hand. He wasn't a chef. He wasn't even trying to be. But there was something oddly reverent in the way he chopped vegetables, like he was respecting a ritual he hadn't grown up with. "I can take over," I offered. He shook his head. "I need the practice." The soup was too salty. The bread was over-toasted. And I wouldn't have changed a thing. We sat across from each other, the entire Vermont night wrapping around us in quiet shadow. A single lamp lit the table, casting warm yellow arcs on the walls. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. We were finally sitting at the same table, not just in space, but in spirit. Julian broke the silence first. "My father loved this table," he said suddenly. He said it was the one piece of furniture that always stayed put, no matter how many times the world tried to move around it. I blinked. "You've been here before?" He nodded slowly. "Once. I was 13. He brought me here after your mother left Boston. Said we were taking a drive. He didn't explain why until we got back." I waited. I didn't breathe. "He stood outside that window for 10 minutes, he continued, his voice quiet. "Watching her cook. She didn't see us. He never knocked. He just said, 'That's the kind of life I should have had.'" I pressed my hand flat on the table between us. The wood was cool beneath my skin, but steady. Unmoving. Just like he said. "I think he wanted to be invited in," I whispered. Julian met my eyes. So did I. That was the moment. Not a kiss, not a touch. Just 2 truths, finally said out loud, and a silence that honored them both. After dinner, we washed dishes together, side by side, not speaking, the way two people who know pain often don't need, to fill space. He dried. I rinsed. And when the last plate was shelved, he reached for the towel and, without fanfare, began wiping down the oak wood surface, circular and slow, like polishing something sacred. Before he left for the night, we lingered by the doorway. "I wasn't supposed to stay long," he said. "Just drop you off, make arrangements, return to the city. But you stayed." He looked down, then up again, slowly. Because I realized I didn't want to go back to a place that never had a table like this. That night, I wrote in the margins of my mother's old cookbook, the one she kept folded under the spice drawer. I didn't write a recipe. I wrote one sentence. The first time I saw him truly, he wasn't powerful. He was present. The sky was the color of old linen when he knocked. 3 short raps on the wooden door. No phone call. No warning. Just a sound I hadn't heard in over a year. I opened it with a breath I didn't realize I was holding. And there he was, my father. He looked smaller. Not in stature, but in spirit. His shoulders, once proud from decades of early rising and late working, were curved slightly inward now, like a man who'd finally learned the weight of what he couldn't fix. He took off his cap. "Clara," he said. And just like that, every rehearsed sentence I had planned melted into mist. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't reach for my hand. I didn't offer it. There was a teacup in front of him he hadn't touched. The silence between us was thick, but not angry. It was the kind of silence that holds too many pages and not enough time. Finally, he spoke. "I thought leaving would make it easier," he said. "That maybe you and your mother wouldn't have to watch me fall apart." "You left because it was easier for you," I said, not cruelly, just honestly. He nodded. "Yes." I looked at him, his face more lined than I remembered, his hair gone entirely gray. This was the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders at county fairs, the one who scraped together every last dollar to buy me a secondhand prom dress, the one who broke, quietly, under debt and shame, and ran. But he had come back, without asking for anything. "Mom's in the back room," I said finally. He looked down at his hands. "May I see her?" I nodded once, and together we walked, the old hallway, past photos that hadn't been updated in years, past ghosts of dinners, birthdays, arguments, and Christmas mornings. When we reached the door, he paused, knocked softly, as if still unsure whether he had the right. Then he stepped in. He sat beside her for a long time holding her hand. She didn't open her eyes, but her fingers twitched around his. And when he whispered her name, Elise, I saw something shift in her face. Just a flicker. Just enough. Julian returned that evening. He didn't walk into the kitchen right away. He stood on the porch, watching the last rays of daylight catch on the edge of the roof. The rain had dried, but the wood still smelled like the storm. I joined, him outside. "My father came back," I said. He turned to me. Not surprised. "I know," he said. I helped him. I blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked out over the yard before speaking. He reached out 2 months ago, asked me for money to get out of town, said he wanted to disappear so you and your mother wouldn't be pulled down with him. I clenched my jaw. "And you gave it to him?" Julian nodded. "On one condition. That one day, if he could face it, he would come back. Not for me. For you." I didn't know what to say. All this time I thought Julian had entered our lives only out of obligation, an extension of an old promise, a name in a letter. But this was not obligation. This was belief. In people. In redemption. In me. I looked at him. Really looked. His jaw was tighter than usual. Not from pride, but from restraint. He hadn't told me earlier. Not to protect himself, but to Protect my father's chance to return with dignity. I reached for his hand. His fingers closed around mine with quiet certainty. That night, the house held a stillness I hadn't felt since childhood. Not the stillness of absence, but the kind that comes when people are exactly where they're meant to be. Later, as I tucked a blanket around my mother's feet, I found a note slipped into the side table drawer. It was my father's handwriting. I couldn't stay then, but I'm here now, and I'll stay for as long as you'll have me. I left it there. She would read it when she was ready. And when I passed the living room on my way upstairs, I saw Julian standing by the fireplace, reading from one of his father's journals. His expression was unreadable, but his presence unmistakable. For the first time in a long time, this house held the weight of men who stayed. Snow came late that year. Not the harsh, biting kind, but the slow, thoughtful snowfall that hushes, the world in white. It came without wind, without warning. Just a gentle drifting from the gray sky, as if winter had finally remembered its promise. I found Julian outside before breakfast, his coat dusted in white, boots sunk into the thawing, earth behind the house. He didn't hear me at first. His back was bent, his sleeves rolled above the wrist. In his gloved hands he held a sapling, bare, spindly, a shock of green at its root. A small trowel lay nearby, and beside it, a plastic tag still flapping from the wind. Valencia orange. Cold-hardy, sun-loving. "You're planting a tree," I said, unsure if it was a question or a prayer. He looked over his shoulder. "It won't bloom for a while." "Maybe not this year," I replied. He nodded. "That's all right. I'm planning for years I haven't earned yet." We worked in silence, side by side, as snowflakes landed gently on the sleeves of my coat and the back of his neck. He dug the hole. I held the sapling steady. The earth was stubborn at first, frozen in places, but gave in with time, just like us. When the roots were settled and the soil patted down, he stepped back, brushing his hands on his coat. "That's where her tree used to be," I said softly. "Mom planted it when I was little. It never bore fruit, but she didn't mind. Said, some things are worth planting just to watch them try." Julian glanced at the spot beside us, just a faded ring in the grass now, half covered by snow. "I didn't know," he said. "I think you did," I whispered. Back inside, I made coffee while he dried his hands by the fire. The house smelled like cinnamon and damp wool. My father was still asleep in the back room. My mother stirred now and then, but hadn't opened her eyes in 2 days. Julian sat at the table with his fingers curled around the mug I handed him. "I don't know how to be this kind of man," he said. "The kind who digs holes in the cold for something he might not see bloom." "You're already doing it," I said. Later that afternoon, we sat on the porch, wrapped in mismatched blankets. The orange sapling stood like a small promise at the edge of the white lawn. Beyond it, the sky began to warm, just barely, light shifting from steel to pearl. "I used to believe everything could be bought," Julian said. "Land, legacy, loyalty." He paused. His breath curled into the air, "But you can't buy being invited into a family kitchen." I turned to him. "And yet, you were." He looked away for a moment, then back. "Because you let me in." That evening, we played old records while the snow thickened outside. My mother used to dance in the kitchen when no one was watching. Barefoot, hips swaying, arms wrapped around nothing at all. I tried. Awkwardly at first. Julian watched from the doorway, smiling with something close to awe, and then joined me. We didn't dance well. But we danced honestly. Before bed, I wrote one line on a note and tucked it under his coffee mug for the morning. "Even in winter, you grew something." The next day, I found a small wooden box on the window ledge of my old bedroom. Inside was the blue stone from my mother's wedding belt, once sewn into the dress I wore the day I married Julian. The stone was now fitted into a pendant. Simple, silver. And beneath it, a note in his handwriting. For the day you decide this life isn't something you're surviving, but something you've chosen. Outside, the orange tree stood in its silent corner of the yard, still bare, still waiting. But for the first time, I looked at it not as a memory of what had been lost, but as a future we were growing into, together. The morning my mother passed, there were robins in the yard. I watched them through the kitchen window, their tiny footprints dotting the snow where it had begun to melt. The orange tree still stood bare in the corner, but the soil around it was softening, and that felt like something. She left in her sleep. No struggle. No noise. Just one long exhale that never circled back. My father was holding her hand. Julian was sitting beside me on the floor, our backs against the wall. None of us spoke for a long time. The house filled slowly that week. Not with people, but with moments. Friends came and went, bearing casseroles and daffodils. The hospice, nurse left a note on the counter with a hand-drawn heart. My mother's sister sang an old hymn at dusk, and I cried for the first time since childhood. Julian moved through it all with quiet precision. He brewed tea. He shoveled the walkway. He mended the loose cabinet hinge in the hallway, the one that had been broken since I was 17. He didn't try to be the center of anything. He just stayed. A week after the funeral, I sat alone, in the back garden, watching the wind tilt the sapling's thin branches. The snow was nearly gone. The grass still bruised but breathing. Julian came outside holding 2 mugs. "Coffee?" he said, sitting beside me. "Yours has too much sugar." Exactly the way I like it. We drank in silence, and then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. A letter. "Your mother wrote this. She gave it to me the day I agreed to marry you." My heart thudded. I opened it carefully, fingers trembling. Her handwriting curved across the page, still elegant, still unmistakably hers. "Julian, if you are reading this, it means you've agreed to carry something heavy for someone you barely know. I don't know what kind of man you'll be when you read this, but I hope you'll be the kind of man who understands that some debts aren't paid in money, but in presence. If you ever learn to love her, do it with actions, not promises. If you can't love her, then at least protect her spirit. She's stronger than she looks, but she still needs softness. Thank you for helping me give her something I could never give her alone. A life beyond survival." Elise Monroe, I folded the letter, tears hot against my throat. I didn't speak for a long while. When I looked up, Julian's eyes were wet too. "You've done everything she asked," I whispered. He shook his head. "Not yet." Then he reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small velvet box. No fanfare. No kneeling. Just the man I had come to trust, offering something not as a question, but as a declaration. Inside was a simple gold ring. No diamonds. No engraving. Just warmth. "Clara," he said, voice steady. "I married you for all the wrong reasons, but I stayed for the right ones. I don't want to live beside you. I want to live with you. Choose you. Every morning, every winter, every year. Will you let this be our beginning, not just our end?" I didn't say yes with my mouth. I said it by taking off the old ring from our contract marriage and sliding the new one on, slow and sure. I said it by leaning into him, letting his forehead rest against mine. And later, by setting one plate, beside his at the table, no longer as guests in each other's lives, but as people finally home. We built something from that day forward. It was not perfect. There were weeks the orange tree didn't bloom. Years it bore nothing. But one spring, a single blossom appeared. Just one. Enough. They call Valentine's Day the day of love. But to me, love came on a quiet Thursday, long after funerals and contracts and misunderstandings. It came with coffee that had too much sugar and a ring with no diamonds. It came with silence that felt like safety. And it stayed. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more quiet, meaningful stories to life. Stories that stay with you long after the last word. Thank you for listening.